Good morning. It is Monday, November the 5th, and this is The Drill. And thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. Okay, so adult children of alcoholics. I don't know what I'm doing here. Let me get this. I want my reading glasses. Let me get those bad boys out, because I'm going to have to read some fine print here. So adult children of alcoholics. And there is something that's called the laundry list. And it is the 14 traits of an adult child. These are characteristics which we seem to have in common due to being brought up in an alcoholic or otherwise dysfunctional household. So let me read them off. Number 1, we became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. Well, as a matter of fact, let me start this again and put it to you this way. The reason I'm going to read this laundry list is because I think that this laundry list describes perfectly, absolutely perfectly, today's socialist/liberal. Okay, so when you hear this, listen to it with that in mind and see if all of these traits don't suit liberals to a T. Number 1, we became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. We became approval seekers and lost our identity in the process. We are frightened by angry people and any personal criticism. We either became alcoholics, marry them, or both, or find another compulsive personality, such as a workaholic, to fulfill our sick abandonment needs. We live life from the viewpoint of victims and are attracted by that weakness in our lovers and friendship relationships. We have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it is easier for us... Let me try something. Let me squeeze. There we go. And it's easier for us to be concerned with others rather than ourselves. This enables us not to look too closely at our own faults, etc. We get guilt feelings when we stand up for ourselves instead of giving in to others. 8, we became addicted to excitement. 9, we confuse love and pity and tend to love people we can pity and rescue. 10, we have stuffed our feelings from our traumatic childhood and have lost the ability to feel or express our feelings because it hurts so much. 11, we judge ourselves harshly and have a very low sense of self-esteem. 12, we are dependent personalities who are terrified of abandonment and will do anything to hold on to a relationship in order not to experience painful abandonment feelings, which we received from living with sick people who were never there emotionally for us. 13, alcoholism is a family disease. We became para-alcoholics and took on the characteristics of that disease even though we did not pick up the drink. And 14, para-alcoholics are reactors rather than actors. And I mean, to me, this just, except for number 13, everything else in this it's an absolute blueprint for today's liberal/socialist. They like to think of anybody that opposes them as being reactionary, but when you look at the dynamics of the way they operate, they're reactors, right? You come out and you say, here, a classic case is the blackface comment made by Megyn Kelly. Oops, now she's out of a job. Okay, how about Shaun White, who goes out and makes, he dresses up for Halloween as a character in a movie called, I forget what the name of it, the character was, but it was supposedly somebody that was on the slow side. And bang, they react. The left reacts to that. So, and there's history is replete with examples of this, especially recent history. Look at, if nothing else, the day after Trump got elected. What was that? How about that the famous one I hear on the radio all the time, that woman that is sobbing and screaming, "You better do something about this. I think I'm going to kill myself. I think I'm going to die, and I'm not kidding. You better get me an ambulance." Reacting. Overreacting. We became isolated and afraid of people and authority figures. Right? Perfect lefties. The Antifa is all about that. We became approval seekers and lost our identity in the process. And you see that with a lot of Hollywood celebrities that are lefties. Approval seeking. By hating Trump, by saving the whales, whatever the case may be. We are frightened by angry people and any personal criticism. Warren, Senator Elizabeth Warren, classic example of that. Classic example. We either became alcoholics, married them, or both, or find another compulsive personality to fulfill our sick abandonment needs. Now, on that one, look at what does their behavior do when they're out shouting down or shouting at or even shouting down political figures from the Republican Party at non-political events, dinners. So they go out to dinner and they get heckled and otherwise verbally abused. And some of the other tactics that they've used, what they did with Justice Kavanaugh during his confirmation process. Is that attractive? Do you think that people are going to flock to you? Or do you think that people are more likely to go the other direction and run away from you and abandon you? So I would add to that, not just what they're looking for in terms of their personal relationships, but what they're looking for in terms of the larger sense, their lives, the activities that they choose to participate in, that they're going to gravitate towards those activities which will have a tendency to repulse other people. Let's see. We live life from the viewpoint of victims and are attracted by that weakness in our love and friendship relationships and in our politics. Right? They are always on and on about victims. One of their famous phrases is about blaming the victim. The whole thing with the Justice Kavanaugh confirmation was about victimology. That the ladies that were victims of, allegedly, Justice Kavanaugh's behavior. Let me see. We have an overdeveloped sense of responsibility, and it's easier for us to be concerned with others rather than ourselves. I mean, this is all they do, is running around telling everybody how we should act towards the homeless, the poor, etc. And it enables us not to look too closely at our own faults. And this is what the left tells itself. There's nothing wrong with you, it's everybody else. It's one of the mantras of the left. That's why it's attractive. You don't have to accept personal responsibility. My life's failing, it's not because of me, it's because of fill in the blank. Donald Trump, the evil capitalists, bankers, big oil, big pharmacies. Okay, where are we at here? Let me see. We get guilt feelings when we stand up for ourselves instead of giving in to others. And that is look at everything that they're doing in terms of protests and whatnot. It's never a protest because they're standing up for themselves. They're always doing these protests and violent activities on behalf of someone else. Let's see. We became addicted to excitement. I think that speaks for itself. The confusing love and pity, intending to love people we can pity and rescue, and look at who and what they're attracted to. They don't want to go to a kennel to buy a dog. They'd rather get a rescue animal. And they have another reason why, from an individual standpoint, why it makes sense that they are constantly on the side of or befriending the homeless, particularly if they're mentally ill or drug addicted. Let me see. we judge ourselves harshly and have a low self-esteem. There's not a lot of expression of self-esteem amongst the people on the left. Let's see things, and them being reactors rather than actors. Again, all of this except for number 13, being from an alcoholic family, seems to me to fit the lefties to a T. And so I think it's something to keep in mind when you're dealing with the left, that there's not only socio-political reasons for what they're doing, but deep psychological reasons and pathologies at work here. So let's see. Today, I think we're going to do. I think I'd like to do. What is it? I think we'll go with Tammy Bruce and David Horowitz, The Black Book of the American Left, on his part, and The Death of Right and Wrong on hers. So we'll be looking at that when we. But first, what we'll do when I come back is read an excerpt out of the book from Ayn Rand, the Ayn Rand Lexicon, in a minute. And welcome back. And let's see, what do we got today? This is going to be on conservatives again. We're going to try and finish out this because it was a really long entry. So, today's conservatives are futile, impotent, and culturally dead. They have nothing to offer and can achieve nothing. They can only help to destroy intellectual standards, to disintegrate thought, to discredit capitalism, and to accelerate this country's uncontested collapse into despair and dictatorship. Wrong, because most of what she's talking about are the people that are ersatz conservatives, or in some cases, false conservatives. And let's see here. The most immoral contradiction in the chaos of today's anti-ideological groups is that of the so-called conservatives, who posture as defenders of individual rights, particularly property rights, but uphold and advocate the draft. By what infernal evasion can they hope to justify the proposition that creatures have no right to life, have the right to a bank account? The antitrust laws, an unenforceable, uncompliable, unjudicable, there you go, mess of contradictions, have for decades kept American businessmen under a silent, growing reign of terror. Yet these laws were created, and to this day are upheld by the conservatives as a grim monument to their lack of political philosophy, of economic knowledge, and of any concern with principles. It was so-called conservatives who ran to the government for regulations and controls over the broadcasting industry, who cheered the notion of public property and service to the public interest. Escalation of controls has been the policy of conservatives in regard to antitrust laws, labor legislation, the military draft, taxation, the negative income tax, etc. If the religionist wing of conservatism is futile, the secular one is, perhaps, worse. The religionists preach the morality of altruism, knowing that the liberals in the extreme left are its much more consistent practitioners, but hoping, since consistency is a requirement of reason, not of faith, that a miracle will wipe out that fact. The secular conservatives solve the contradiction by discarding morality altogether, by surrendering it to the enemy and declaring that social, political, economic problems are amoral. Capitalism is not the system of the past, it is the system of the future. If mankind is to have a future, those who wish to fight for it must discard the title of conservatives. Conservatism has always been a misleading name, inappropriate to America. Today, there's nothing left to conserve. The established political philosophy, the intellectual orthodoxy, and the status quo are collectivism. Those who reject all basic premises of collectivism are radicals in the proper sense of the word. Radical means fundamental. Today, the fighters for capitalism have to be not bankrupt conservatives, but new radicals, new intellectuals, and above all, new dedicated moralists. And the problem here is that Ayn Rand is comparing conservatism to objectivism, and objectivism is an idealistic politic. It's a contradiction. because Ayn Rand claims that objectivity is the basis for everything. Yet, when she created objectivism, she ceased to be objective. Okay, she is now promoting her so-called philosophy. It actually is a philosophical theory, and again, since it is a contradiction, it is basically null and void. Doesn't mean that she doesn't have a lot of other good ideas and that she isn't right about a lot of other things, but to use her philosophy as the basis for which to draw comparisons with other philosophies is a non-starter. It just doesn't work. Okay, so when I come back, we're going to go to Tammy Bruce and the death of right and wrong. Okay, thank you very much. Welcome back. Oops. What do we got here? Let's try this again. There we go. There she is. There's Tammy Bruce. Chapter 3, Then and Now, Feminists and Killers and Men. Oh my. Oh, I guess that's a takeoff on the Lions and Tigers and Bears. Feminists and Killers and Men. Oh my. Only crime and the criminal, it is true, confront us with the perplexity of radical evil, but only the hypocrite is really rotten to the core, said by a philosopher named Hannah Arendt. In November 2000, Monica Berger filed for divorce from Gregory Berger, her husband of 14 years. 2 years early, Monica and Greg had adopted a newborn baby they named Joseph. At the time, his adoptive mother started divorce proceedings. Joey, as he was called, was a lively, happy little boy. Greg was known to be loving and caring toward Joey, so Monica couldn't accuse him of being violent or inadequate father when seeking custody. She instead argued in court that Joey had life-threatening food allergies and that Greg would not provide the kind of care he needed. Monica's argument worked. She received temporary custody of Joey and moved to Louisville, Kentucky. She left behind her estranged husband in Jasper, Indiana, where both of them had grown up and where they had planned on raising their adopted son. No one could have imagined the kind of care Monica would be giving Joey. On July 6, 2001, as divorce proceedings were underway, Monica Berger killed her son, stabbing the little 2-year-old 30 times with a butcher knife. Leaving the mangled body in her condominium, she went out for a walk. When police, who were routinely patrolling the area, came upon the bloodied woman, they went with her to the condo, finding the carnage she had left behind. The situation is pretty clear. If it were a man who, in the midst of divorce proceedings, murdered his child, even in our current judicial climate, he would be heading to the electric chair or, at least, to a very long prison term. But not Monica. In February 2002, Circuit Court Judge Ken Conliffe dismissed murder charges against this killer. Why? She was found to have been mentally ill at the time of the murder because she had stopped taking her medication for Addison's disease. Addison's disease is what afflicted President John F. Kennedy, a disorder affecting the adrenal glands. It causes fatigue and muscle weakness, loss of appetite, and weight loss. Sufferers crave salty foods, but it can also cause irritability and depression. But insanity sufficient to excuse the brutal murder of a trusting child? It's hard to swallow, but in today's morally bankrupt culture, so-called feminists, like the leaders of black and gay special interest groups, have made it their number one priority to remove their constituents from your judgment. Women are not to be judged even if they kill their children, because, gosh, they must have had a good reason, and you have no right to assume otherwise. This is the legacy of years of establishment feminist rhetoric, positioning women as victims of society, victims of motherhood, victims of family, victims of religion, of men, and the ultimate betrayal of being the portrayal of women as victims of their own femaleness. Now, she doesn't go far enough. It's good as far as it goes, but it doesn't go far enough. In that, what's at work here is also determinism, the ridiculous notion that people have no free will and that everything they do is done by force, by powers beyond their control. So in this particular case, she was forced to do what she did because this is all under the rubric of no ethics. Ethics being properly considered being universal rights and wrongs. Okay, if reality is objective, then we can know with certainty what is real, and therefore we can also know with certainty what is right and what is wrong. And do so universally. Know what is not only right and wrong for me, but right and wrong for each and every one of us. However, if you say, well, reality doesn't exist, then you can't be certain of anything. And if you can't be certain of anything, then there can be no universal rights and wrongs. Okay, so what are you left with then? How do you explain people's behavior? Determinism. They're forced to do what they do by powers beyond their control. In this case, by her disease and perhaps by side effects from the medication that she was taking to, because if the side effects may have led her to stop taking her medication or whatever. That's at issue here. And what needs to be said is determinism is dead. The woman made a choice of her own free will. Of her own free will, she decided to murder her 3-year-old son. And let me see what else do we have here. Mentally ill at the time of the murder because she stopped taking her medication. And mentally ill is basically about was she able to tell the difference between right and wrong. But then again, if you deny right and wrong in the first place, then there's nothing to tell the difference between, is there? Then again, how do you explain the behavior? How do you explain people's behavior? She was forced to. The problem isn't her. She shouldn't be incarcerated. What should happen is that society should spend the money, the resources necessary to rid ourselves of Addison's disease and or come up with better treatments and therapies for Addison's disease until we can get rid of it. But it's always that way. The individual's never wrong. Okay? It's always society. And it's always the excuse for revolution. That women are going to continue to murder their children until we come up with the perfect society. Until we come up with socialist paradise. BS. Okay? People have free will, and those that use their free will to do evil things should be punished. So when I come back, it is going to be the Black Book of the American Left and David Horowitz. Thank you very much. Chapter 14, Something We Did. So, let's see. Well, we'll go ahead and get started with this and see how it goes. Just before Labor Day this year, a theater review in the Washington Post alerted me to the fact that someone had made me, or a fictional representation of me, into a principal character in his play, Something You Did. Purports to be, in his play, Something You Did, in the name of the play, purports to be a drama about the parole appeal of an actual person, Kathy Boudin, who 40 years ago was a member of 2 violent organizations and was directly involved in the violent deaths of 6 human beings, although the play mentions only 1. Despite the fact that I myself was never the member of any violent group and never so much as threw a rock in the 60s, the playwright has cast my character as the bad guy, complicit in her crime and an embodiment of the political forces that Boudin opposed at the time and that the playwright opposes now. The day after the Post review appeared, I received a confirming email from my friend of nearly 60 years, Ron Radish, who had just attended a performance and who sent me a scanned copy of a statement by the playwright explaining his play. In his note, the playwright identified me as the villain of his drama and said he had chosen me because I had written what he called the most corrosive attack on Kathy Boudin when she came up for parole. Excuse me. And also because I was a former radical turned outspoken neoconservative, unquote. It was, he said, his intention to have this play make a statement about the present. Finally, he described the play as asking and answering this question, quote, whether the radical sins of the past can be forgiven even as the reactionary sins of the present multiply, unquote. And again, note the word reactionary in light of the laundry list that I mentioned earlier. With this loaded question, there can be no suspense as to the answer. Boudin is to be forgiven because she has remained a radical, and therefore her heart was and is in the right place. Never mind that she caused the deaths of 3 innocent people and left 9 children fatherless. Whatever mistake she committed, her intention was to save the Vietnamese and other oppressed people from conservatives like myself. Such was the thesis of the play. A fiction based on reality can provide useful insights only if the structure of the facts remains intact. Unfortunately, this playwright so distorted the facts as to deprive his fiction of the ability to provide insights that are useful to an understanding of what happened. To begin, allow me to clear up his malicious claim that there is a moral parallel between Kathy Boudin's criminal act and David Horowitz's contribution to the death of Betty Van Patter at the hands of the Black Panthers. Kathy Boudin knowingly joined a radical group whose purpose was to conduct an actual war inside the United States. The Weather Underground set bombs, possibly murdered 2 officers. There is a continuing cold case investigation into this, and inadvertently blew up 3 of its own members when an anti-personnel device intended for others went off prematurely. When the underground disintegrated and most of its leaders surfaced to return to civilian life, Kathy remained at war, joining a second violent group with identical goals. As a member of the May 19th Communist organization, she participated in an armed robbery in Nyack, New York, to finance the revolution. In the course of the robbery, 3 officers were murdered and 9 children left fatherless. There's no parallel between Kathy's criminal career and what I did as a New Left radical. I never broke a law or plotted to injure another human being. Although I raised money for a Black Panther school and attempted to help the Panthers develop a learning center, I never joined their organization or advocate that others should. The money I raised was to purchase and build a school. I became involved with the Panthers only after their leader, Huey Newton, had publicly proclaimed that it was time to put away the gun. In those days, the New York Times was comparing Newton to Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther, literally. When I recommended Betty Van Patter to the Panthers as a bookkeeper, I accepted the left's view of the Panthers as victims of white racism and a noble force in the struggle for racial justice. I had no idea they were capable of cold-blooded murder. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it at that for the time being. We'll pick this up probably, next week probably. So we've reached the conclusion of another episode of The Drill, and I thank everybody for listening. And until next time, have a great day.